June 5th, 2020, 5 a.m., Hanahan, South Carolina. In the quiet pre-dawn hours of June 5th, 2020, a call shattered the stillness inside the emergency dispatch center in Hanahan, South Carolina. The voice on the line trembled. It belonged to 37-year-old Matthew Speck. He sounded breathless, panicked, struggling to piece together his words. Two men, he claimed, had broken into his home in the upscale Eagle Landing neighborhood. He and his wife had been asleep when the intruders attacked. There had been gunfire. He was injured. His wife, he said, had been shot. Patrol units were dispatched immediately. When officers arrived, dawn had not yet broken. The neighborhood lay in darkness, its manicured lawns and neatly aligned houses still and silent. There were no figures running down the street, no vehicles speeding away, no broken glass glinting beneath streetlights. Officers secured the perimeter first. The front door was closed, locked, deadbolted from the inside. Windows were intact, screens uncut. There were no pry marks on frames, no splintered wood, no forced entry of any kind. Inside, the house appeared eerily undisturbed. Furniture stood precisely where it belonged. Decorative items rested neatly on shelves. Nothing in the foyer suggested chaos or urgency. It was only when officers reached the second floor that the scene shifted from calm to catastrophe. In the master bedroom, 33-year-old Caitlyn Speck lay motionless on the bed. At the foot of that bed, on a rug she was known to nap on daily, was Bailey May, the family's golden Labrador retriever. She too was gone. Matthew Speck stood nearby, blood staining his clothing. Fresh cuts marked his forearms and abdomen. He told officers he had struggled with the attackers before they fled moments prior to police arrival. But even in those first minutes, something felt wrong. To understand what investigators would eventually uncover, the story had to rewind to 2008. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. The year Caitlyn Conran met Matthew Speck at a community event. Caitlyn had been born on August 18, 1986. By 22, she was working from home as a designer, a career that allowed her to shape her days around creativity and independence. She loved the comfort of her two-story home in Eagle Landing. She loved the quiet suburban rhythm. Most of all, she loved Bailey May, the golden lab who followed her from room to room and slept at her feet while she worked. Matthew had moved in early in their relationship. To outside observers, the couple seemed stable. They owned property, they invested in renovations, they hosted gatherings. They appeared united. Caitlyn had recently been planning a significant home remodel. She discussed tile samples and cabinetry options with friends. Sketches lay across tables. Construction materials were stacked neatly in the garage. The house was not a temporary stop. It was her sanctuary. But behind the curated image of domestic stability, fractures had begun to form. Close friends later revealed that Caitlyn had confided in them about a growing emotional distance in her marriage. Matthew was spending more time away. Conversations had grown colder, less intimate. Something felt off. Still, Caitlyn did not seek separation. She did not search for apartments. She poured herself deeper into the life she believed she was building. What she didn't know was that her daily routines, her work hours, her sleep patterns, even the behavior of her dog, were becoming subjects of calculation inside the mind of the man she shared her home with. Back in the present, forensic teams began their systematic analysis of the home. The first priority: determine how the alleged intruders had entered. Every possible access point was examined. The front door had been secured with both a deadbolt and an interior latch. All windows, upstairs and down, were sealed. No glass was broken. No mesh screens torn. No scuff marks suggested a forced climb. Inside, valuables were untouched. Caitlyn's wallet sat in plain view with cash and credit cards still inside. Laptops remained on desks. Jewelry boxes were unopened. Drawers had not been pulled out. There was no evidence of ransacking, no indication that anyone had searched for valuables. If this was a robbery, it was the least thorough one imaginable. Even more telling, there were no footprints on the floors, no dirt tracked in from outside, no displaced rugs or overturned furniture beyond the bedroom. According to Matthew, two men had burst into the room, shot his wife, injured him, and fled. But how? Anyone leaving the house would have had to relock the deadbolt and latch from the inside, an impossible maneuver unless they never left or possessed keys. Investigators found no signs of lockpicking. No spare keys were missing. The house had effectively become an airtight capsule. When police arrived, only 3 living beings had been inside: Caitlyn, Matthew, and Bailey May. The theory of an external break-in was beginning to collapse. Matthew was transported to a hospital where doctors and detectives evaluated his injuries. He claimed they were sustained in a violent struggle. Forensic specialists reached a different conclusion. The cuts on his arms and torso were shallow. Their edges were clean and controlled, not jagged, not torn. They lacked the chaotic irregularity typical of defensive wounds sustained during knife attacks. There were no deep gashes on his palms or the backs of his hands, wounds commonly seen when someone attempts to grab a blade or shield themselves. Instead, the injuries resembled hesitation marks, the kind associated with self-infliction. Their placement was telling. The forearms, the front of the abdomen, easily reachable areas. Blood-stain patterns on his clothing suggested he had been standing still when injured. In a real struggle, blood would have sprayed unpredictably, smeared across surfaces in dynamic motion. Here, it was controlled, consistent. Medical reports confirmed none of his wounds were life-threatening. None required complex surgical intervention. Meanwhile, the woman in the bedroom had not stood a chance. For investigators, the presence of Bailey May became a pivotal element in understanding motive and opportunity. Ballistics testing confirmed that dog had been shot with the same weapon used to kill Caitlyn. The angle indicated close range. Bailey was found in her usual spot near the bed. There were no signs she had lunged or attempted to flee. Neighbors later told investigators that Bailey was vocal around strangers. She barked whenever unfamiliar individuals approached the property. Yet that morning, no neighbor reported hearing barking before the gunshots. That detail carried enormous weight. If strangers had entered the home, Bailey would almost certainly have sounded an alarm. Instead, silence. Whoever entered the bedroom that night was someone she recognized, someone she trusted. Investigators posed a critical question. Why would robbers waste time shooting a pet? The answer made sense only within the context of staging. Eliminating the dog eliminated noise, unpredictability, and any reaction that could disrupt a carefully controlled scenario. Even in death, Bailey May pointed toward the truth. The shooter was not an outsider. While Matthew remained under medical observation, digital forensic analysts examined his phone and computer. What they found transformed suspicion into something far more concrete. In the days leading up to June 5th, his online searches had taken a disturbing turn. He had visited forums discussing toxicology and crime scene staging. He spent hours reading detailed threads about how robberies are faked. He researched lethal dosages of poisons, including cyanide. Screenshots stored on his phone showed maps of potential exit routes from Eagle Landing, theoretical escape paths. The timing was damning. These searches occurred late at night while Caitlyn was home. The digital footprint contradicted any narrative of a spontaneous home invasion. Investigators now turned to motive. 2 key witnesses provided insight. An ex-girlfriend, recently reconnected with Matthew, handed over messages in which he described his marriage as a formality he intended to handle soon. He spoke of starting a new life. A co-worker painted an even clearer picture. Matthew rarely criticized Caitlyn personally. Instead, he complained about financial entanglements. He emphasized that Caitlyn would never agree to sell the house. Divorce for him meant asset division and ongoing financial obligation. He had asked what typically happens to shared real estate if one spouse dies unexpectedly. The implication was chilling. With Caitlyn gone, he would retain the property and avoid a costly divorce. The house was not just a home, it was a financial asset he refused to lose. Hours after discharge from the hospital, Matthew sat in an interrogation room. Detectives employed logic traps. He claimed he chased intruders down the hallway. One detective asked calmly, "If you chased them, how was the front door locked from the inside when officers arrived?" Matthew faltered. Matthew claimed he may have locked the door himself in shock. Then his story shifted. Vague, inconsistent, almost surreal. Detectives confronted him with the forensic evidence. His wounds were shallow. No defensive injuries. No gunpowder residue on his clothes. Then came the final blow. His search history. How to fake a robbery. Lethal dose of cyanide. The room went silent. There was nothing left to say. He was arrested. Reconstructing the night, investigators later determined the attack didn't begin at 5 a.m. It began hours earlier. Matthew waited until Caitlyn was asleep. He used a preloaded weapon and fired at close range. She never had a chance to defend herself. Bailey May was shot where she lay. Afterward, Matthew carefully staged the scene, avoiding damage to valuables he planned to keep. In the bathroom, he inflicted shallow cuts on himself, controlling their depth. He waited. Then, at 5 a.m., he made the call. In November 2024, the trial began in Berkeley County Court. Forensic experts testified that Matthew's injuries were signs of planning, not struggle. Ballistics showed the shooter had been standing still. No evidence supported the presence of intruders. After 5 days, the jury deliberated briefly. Matthew Speck was found guilty of premeditated murder, animal cruelty, and unlawful use of a firearm. Sentencing, Judge Detra Jefferson sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years. The court ruled he could not benefit from his crime. The Eagle Landing home was transferred to Caitlyn's family. Today, he serves life in prison, and Caitlyn and Bailey May are remembered not for the violence that ended their lives, but for the truth that could not be buried. If you found this case analysis detailed and informative, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below.